afternoon, and welcome to another Research in Action brought to you by Florida Atlantic's Division of Research. My name is Karen Scapinato. I will be today's moderator. Before we get started, I'm going to go over a few logistical items before I introduce today's speakers. We will mix up our format a bit today in that we have invited Dr. Michael Harari and Dr. Amy Cooper Hakim to talk a bit together about employability during a pandemic. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Harari, who is an industrial organizational psychologist and also associate professor of management at Florida Atlantic University. His research addresses very appropriately for today's presentation how employers make hiring decisions, how an employer's hiring procedures affect job applicants, and how people can develop themselves in order to be more successful in crafting their careers in turbulent environments. He will be talking with Amy Cooper Hakim today, who is also an industrial organizational psychologist, but a practitioner and a workplace expert. Dr. Hakim also has published a book working with difficult people. Check that out. I definitely need that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Harari and Dr. Hakim and take us off.
Thank you so much, Karen. Looking forward to discussing this very important issue today, one about which I am quite passionate. After all, I've dedicated a good portion of my career to studying these related issues. And I'm going to kick things off by providing a bit of an overview of what how employability as such a central role in our lives has thought to have emerged, and what we mean by employability. And in other words, this is an interdisciplinary type of area, and being employable is a very broad concept. So we need to kind of narrow down the different buckets to which we can be referring when we discuss employability, and we could then kind of have a roadmap for our discussion today. Maybe you have experienced or heard of the days where individuals felt as though they can rely on employment with a single employer to kind of meet their career needs long term. Not to say that that's never the case, but it certainly is not so much the case these days as it has been in the past. And we've seen a decline over the decades of a change over the decades of the standard employer-employee psychological contract. If you think about it, the psychological contract used to be something along the lines of, the expectation is a mutual investment by employer and employee, development and opportunities for growth. But due to a variety of factors, a lot of them external, we've ended up more and more so becoming in an environment that's considered more boundaryless. In other words, in order to develop oneself, to manage one's career, and to ensure continued employment security across time, we can't rely as much on job security within a single employer. We need to rely on employability as a personal resource that we can leverage in order to meet our personal career goals and ensure lifelong employment. So this has emerged, this concept of employability, it's just become very central in our lives. When we think about the term employability, we often think about people who are on the job market, or people who are students who are looking to become prepared, or maybe it's something that career counselors are concerned with. But I take the position that employability is relevant to absolutely everyone. We keep getting reminders time and time again that the future cannot be predicted. The world in which we live is incredibly turbulent, and it can affect our employment prospects at the drop of a dime. And if we're not prepared for that, we're going to have a lot of trouble maybe picking up the pieces and moving on. So that's a nice lead in to this first perspective. And I'm going to do just an introduction to each, and then we'll be, Amy and myself will be discussing each of these further. So this brings us right into our first perspective, which is, if careers don't really take place as much within a single organization across time, if one's career is something that is boundaryless, that's crafted together by that individual across employment experiences, well, we need to update or revise our thinking about how we can take control of our own development, and in order to develop ourselves, to instill in us and make sure we're developing career competencies that we need in order to succeed in this type of environment where there's going to be more turbulence, more between organization changes. Now, obtaining a job, though, after all, being employable, it's right there in the name. We can think about it as, right, like the ability to be employed. So sure, we need good career competencies and to ensure that we're developing ourselves to be able to make such transitions. But a point in time will come where we have to, the rubber meets the road and we have to find a job. And that's where the job search perspective comes in. So, there's a whole literature trying to understand, what kind of things to delineate people who are successful in a job search. That is, people who are getting interviews, getting second interviews, finding opportunities that they like. What are some of the factors that differentiate those people from others who are having less success? And this is something that's studied in the employed, but mostly is studied in students and the unemployed population. So we'll be discussing some of these issues. And then finally, you're, searching for jobs. It's all well and good, but we also need to get the offer. Hiring decisions, there's another whole body of work that tries to understand how do employers go about making hiring decisions. And selection, or staffing, is an area where myself and Amy have both spent a good portion of our career doing research and consulting in developing hiring systems for organizations. And we also need to think about, well, what are organizations generally looking for? How do we convey these types of things properly? So that's the roadmap for what we're going to discuss. And we'll begin by discussing some maybe career competency items, and we'll move in order. And we'll hopefully be able to take questions as we go so that we are able to, respond in real time while we're on a particular topic. So please do be sure to voice those. When it comes to the career competency perspective, and I'll be exiting these slides in a moment. When it comes to the career competency perspective, we are trying to, there's a number of ways we can think about this, but fundamentally what we see emerge over and over is this idea that there are 3 key career competencies that we have to think about continuously developing if we want to be employable. And these are knowing what, knowing whom, and knowing why. So they're a nice catchy way to remember it. I'll give a brief explanation. Knowing what? That's knowledge, skills, human capital, right? If we don't know a lot about our field, we are not going to probably be very successful in selling ourselves to employers down the road. And, this requires constant update and development because things change. So we have our human capital piece, our knowing what. We also have our knowing whom. The old adage is true. Is it what you know or is it who you know, right? It certainly matters. And we'll talk a bit about that networking piece, the social capital. And finally, knowing why emerges as being very important. What is it? What are you interested in? What do you want out of your career? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Some level of insight into yourself is going to be very essential, the research tells us, for being employable. With that said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Amy, do you have any of the maybe any of those competencies stand out to you? Any thoughts related to those, or anything else that can fit in that bucket?
Sure. Well, thank you for including me here. I'm happy to speak with you about this very important topic. I think that it's especially important to be realistic and pragmatic when assessing our own skill sets and our goals for employability. So I love to sing. Before we started, we were talking about your love of music as well. And I recall very vividly 30 years ago or so when I sat down with my parents and started to discuss what I was choosing for my career. I had a discussion that was very, very frank with them. They said, Amy, you love to sing, but are you going to be the next Paula Abdul, who at the time was pretty popular? Is that going to happen? Is that what you want? Do you also want what entails, what comes with a career in music? Do you want to be busy evenings, weekends? Do you want to not be able to grow a family? Whatever those priorities were for me. And I had that heart to heart, and I honestly was a bit dismayed, but recognized that singing, which I do love to do, would then be a hobby, not a career. So we need to be very pragmatic in our approach. We need to say, what is it that I'm going to do that will ultimately make me money? Ultimately help me to advance not just today, this moment, but a career in a particular industry or field, or set me on a launching pad so that I can then get to my end career goals.
Let me note on that same point, though. Here I am, professor, Ph.D. I almost dropped out of grad school to be a musician. I'm very happy that I didn't, because as Amy noted, I think of that as like the whole life perspective, right? We need to think about, what do we want our life to actually look like? And when I sit down with a student who wants to talk about the different careers that are of interest to them, I often ask questions that they may not expect, like, do you want to travel? Where do you want to live? Are you place bound? Do you want to stay in South Florida? Is there somewhere else you want to live? Because opportunities are often geographically constrained. And, we need to think about, what do we want our whole life to look like? And our job, our career is a part of that. I wanted to bring up some of the points related then to human capital. Or I'm sorry, Amy, did you have any further thoughts related to the knowing why and what your interests are before we talk about anything?
I think we pretty much really covered that. The truth is, we have to be candid with ourselves, and we have to take a moment, take a beat before jumping. This isn't like, which flavor of toothpaste am I buying this week? Right? This is serious. And so we need to take that moment and recognize that there are different phases of careers. So if we're at the start of our career, we may have different goals or different perspectives. And also we do have to look at the life cycle. Where we are in the life cycle can truly impact the practicality of a career choice, and then ultimately our employability.
That reminds me of a phenomenon that we study called embeddedness, which is, as there's like this, we can define age in a lot of different ways. We tend to think about age, it's like, oh, well, how many years you've been alive? But we can think about it in a lot of ways. And there's this lifespan aging perspective. And, people at vastly different ages can be at the same stage when it comes to their life. And what we find is, as people move through life stages, this embeddedness does increase. Changing careers for some people could mean pulling their kids out of their school, selling their home, leaving their community. And, this is one of the many reasons why it's so important, I think, to take that whole life type of perspective and, what is it that's reasonable within the constraints in which you currently find yourself.
It's also important to remember that we can say, oops, I made a mistake, right? If we're on this trajectory and we really thought 5 years ago that this is where we want to be, and we're realizing, eek, it's not exactly what I had hoped. It's not as practical. There aren't as many opportunities as I might have wished. I'm not as successful in these tasks as I thought I would be. Maybe it's time to revisit as well. And asking people who know you well is a great first step. Especially if you tell them and phrase it by saying, I won't take to heart what you say in a negative way. Let me know, lay it on the table. Where are my strengths and where are my areas of opportunity?
Yeah, you can't make good decisions without those good, honest appraisals. And I like how you're getting into some strategies for being able to do that. Something else that comes to mind related to maybe some exploration related strategies. There is something that we HR practitioners like Amy and myself, where we do something that's called a job analysis, which is where we go into an organization and we try to really study a job, we analyze it, we try to break it down into its components and learn everything there is to know about it. Well, there is also a database online that contains a lot of job analysis information. If someone is in a career exploration phase, I strongly recommend visiting the Occupational Information Network webpage, ONET, O-N-E-T, onetonline.org, or just Google it. It is a phenomenal tool for career exploration because what you will find there, any job you can imagine, look it up. You'll see all of the things, all the job responsibilities. You'll see all of the job requirements. You can take an honest appraisal of what's this work environment like? Can I see myself working in an environment like this? What's the outlook? Is there supposed to be hiring in this area? It's all there. Do I have these skills? Can I develop these skills? I strongly recommend that as a resource. And ONET also has a free career quiz you can take. So if you're not really clear about what type of environment might best suit you, you can log into ONET, you can take this free quiz, and it has this huge database of jobs. It will match you to different jobs at different levels of seniority that are appropriate for you. It can be a big help in narrowing things down.
Definitely. And you can also, if you have narrowed it down to a particular career or industry, you might request to speak to somebody, do some networking. And we're going to talk more about that. But the idea of getting a realistic job preview is also critical. If you can speak to someone and figure out exactly what it looks like to have, a day in the life of, let's say I want to be a firefighter. What does that look like in real terms, not just on paper? What does that mean? What do I do? How long do I work in a shift? How many hours do I need to practice in order to gain particular skills? How many dangerous or mundane tasks are there? Whatnot. So having that discussion with a live human is also very, very helpful.
And to be honest, in my mind, that's a nice segue to networking when you think about it, because, no one is at least offended if you are asking for their advice and input in something where they're an expert. If there was an undergraduate student who said, I'm really interested in being a professor one day, and I really liked your class. Can I talk about some of the research you're doing? What's it like to be a professor? I'd be thrilled. Mm-hmm. And not only will they get some insight, well, maybe if they want to get accepted to grad school, they may need some research opportunities. And now they started to form a connection that they could leverage to get those opportunities. They can get a letter of recommendation. So it seems like, trying to connect with someone who could help to give you that window can do a lot more than just that. And I think we both know, Amy, and I think maybe some audience members are aware of this as well. Most jobs, we'll talk about job search later, but most jobs are not found by, searching job boards. They are found through one's personal network. I think one value that I'm familiar with is somewhere in the 60%. If you take a sample of people and you ask them, how did you find your last job? Somewhere around 60% are going to say through their network.
Networks are huge, really, really, really important. And we need to start and build our network, not when we're looking for a job, but when we are at the beginning stages. So even right now, if you haven't done so, begin to think about, who should I network with? Why should I network with them? How broad is my network right now? And social networking is huge, but we also have so many electronic means. And I get pretty much every single consulting opportunity through my LinkedIn connections, 100%.
I always tell my students, especially when you're a student, the opportunity to network, is phenomenal. Taking advantage of any opportunity for conferences in your areas. Obviously, there's a lot of digital opportunities now, which is honestly like a strength and a weakness in some ways. Sure, it's good to be able to go somewhere and shake someone's hand and exchange cards and chat with each other, but in my experience, a lot of the professional associations are getting very good at ensuring that they're allowing networking opportunities and facilitating network opportunities digitally using, for instance, breakout rooms. In some instances, especially if you find yourself to be a bit more of the shy type who may be less likely to walk up to someone at a conference or whatever it may be, if it's facilitated digitally and you find yourself in a breakout room with 2, 3 other people, it's, maybe you'll have a lot more comfort in interacting in that way. So that's my general thoughts there. Do you have any thoughts, Amy, specifically related to the use of LinkedIn for networking? I've never done any work there.
I love LinkedIn. I am not a huge social media fan. I tried very hard to be, and actually I'm encouraged to be on Twitter and Facebook, but LinkedIn is my friend. I find LinkedIn to be specifically professional. They have different associations, chapter type vibes. And so you can literally be associated and affiliated with various groups. So I can't speak to the exact titles, but I know that I'm an affiliate of an IO psychology group and a human resources group and a retail business group. That's a lot of my bread and butter is in the retail industry. So I definitely have that. And what happens is people also reach out to me and they'll say, can I join your network? And so unlike Facebook, which is social and personal, this is professional. So it's strictly with that intention. And so therefore, I don't necessarily care if I know the individual. I want to expand that network. Facebook, I'm more private, and except for my business Facebook page, right? So my LinkedIn page, though, is specifically professional. And so with that, what happens is that, if you have a video, you can create a nice profile where your actual any video or web page, that type of thing is actually all suited in your biography. So you have this area here, and it's just right there for you in the bio area. And so then people can look for you. And the other thing is you're not just joining LinkedIn to get a job, you're joining LinkedIn to network. And so if you have, 20 minutes, even a week to spend looking through various articles that are of interest to you, to your industry, to a field you might be interested in, then what happens is you can respond and respond intelligently, carry on a dialogue, much like an online discussion forum, and you have this interaction. And so then people will keep you top of mind if there's some related experience, whether that be something for pay or not. At least it's industry related and can help you to continue to network and keep your foot in the door.
Michael, we had a couple of questions here, and also some are related to the resources you just mentioned. The onetonline.org is the website, but we will put all these resources on our website afterwards together with a recording of this, so you can find all those resources later. In addition to that, our Career Center actually uses Onet online as well. So we'll put all these resources on our website. But there is a question here with regard to the networking that you mentioned, and I would second the use of LinkedIn, which I also use for professional, professional goals. But there's a question here: what happens if you're new in town? And you don't really have any network yet, definitely not a local network. So do you have any recommendations how to go about creating that network that would really kind of like be your safety net to build yourself up there and catapult you into potentially a new job?
I think that's a really interesting and definitely pertinent question, especially since a lot of maybe local meetups that would be taking place otherwise are not happening at the moment. One thing to note is, the issue, the points that came up related to LinkedIn are all relevant here. And, for plenty of, depending on what field one is in, most fields are large enough to where on LinkedIn, there will be maybe geographic specific groups available for this as well. So that's certainly something that can be looked into. And, when so for instance, I'm in human resource management. The Society for Human Resource Management has, a big annual conference where everyone comes from all over the country, but there's also local ones. I could, go to a Boca one. In this case, it would be virtual, but I would start thinking along those lines. That would be my own opinion on the matter.
And this is a little bit made it a little bit harder, I think, during the pandemic, right? Where you cannot just go somewhere and to meet new people, right? I mean,
but
now you
that's
have to
okay.
purposefully go online, right?
Right. We can purposely go online, but we can also request to have a virtual coffee with someone, to meet with them for 10, 15 minutes. And actually, so a service like LinkedIn allows you the opportunity to interact that way. You can send a private message to an individual you're interested in, even before they accept your request for friendship, right? So you can say, I'm very interested in this field and I would love to connect. And then once you connect with that individual, you might even say, I'd love to speak further to see if this is an area of interest for me, or to meet new people who are in the local area. I see that you are in Boca Raton. May I please meet with you? And it could be virtual, and eventually grabbing a cup of coffee once we get back to normalcy will be nice. But definitely, I mean, I get requests quite often to meet with people, and I'm very happy to spend 15 minutes to chat with someone, to give them an idea of the field, or just to have that friendly face. So we can do so virtually, we can do so telephonically, and ultimately grabbing a cup of coffee is always something that's welcomed by many professionals.
Yeah, that sounds great. Were there any other questions related to that?
Only related to the fact that employers can be rather difficult and not very very easy to get along with, and maybe that's for you, Amy. You have written a book on working with difficult people. Can you relate to that and maybe give some pointers on how to deal with a difficult employer?
Sure. So I do. That's my sweet spot is helping to improve relationships between employees and employers in the workplace. And so the main thing that I like to recommend is to distinguish between the people we're interacting with at a professional level versus those people who are truly our friends. And it's a nice segue from what we were talking about with Facebook versus LinkedIn. So professional relationships, we can't have the same emotional investment in those professional relationships, or we'll actually oftentimes feel uncomfortable. We might feel distraught if someone is rude or inappropriate or not kind to us, or not as welcoming or warm as we might hope. We should have different standards for friends than we do for people who we work for or with. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a professional environment or a comfortable environment or a kind environment, but it is different than someone who is emotionally invested in us and we in them. So we have to recognize that the employer's job and his or her main focus is to make money, is to meet quotas, is to have someone who is productive. So if you don't feel comfortable with that vibe, if you're not capable or able to work well in that type of environment, then that might not be the place for you. But if you're able to remove the emotional component, remove that emotional connection, and focus more specifically on the job itself, on the role that you have and what you would be doing for that individual or what you currently are, and you can distinguish that and keep it practical, then that's going to help you to focus your energy at work, on work, and then focus your emotional energy with those people and relationships that are more important.
Wonderful. They heard it from the expert here, and buy the book for more information. The only thing in this bucket, this like career competency bucket, we didn't touch upon is the human capital piece. There's one thing. It's one thing to have a lot of skills and knowledge, human capital, but it's another thing to maintain that across time, because the world changes and it often can change very, very rapidly. And, the people who are most employable are those who are able to continuously monitor the environment, know like what are the trends that are taking place, what's happening, and, how can I stay at the cutting edge of this? One I already brought up ONET already, when it comes to career exploration, but I'd like to give it another plug to everyone listening when it comes to human capital development as well. Because it's very nice to where if there's a career trajectory that interests you, if there's a job you want, you could pull it up on ONET and you see all of the knowledge and skills and the various qualifications that you need in order to perform that role effectively and appear attractive to an employer. So I would strongly recommend using it for human capital development as well. There's also a section on ONET for technology related skills. So they isolated those, and they're of course rapidly changing. And you'll be able to use ONET as a resource to really stay abreast of some of these things. And then, hopefully if you start to develop a network, they'll help you out too to understand, what's on the horizon in the field, if you're going to conferences, etc. But setting aside some time to try to make sure that you are doing what is in your control in order to increase your human capital, in order to stay abreast of the changes and make sure that you are going to stand out in terms of your ability to perform this job at any time, in any place, because you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities required to do it.
That's a great point. And I think that we have to recall, no matter who we are, no matter what stage we are in our career, we can always learn. The wisest scholars can look at the same text and find nuances that they didn't see when they read it the first time. So it's super important for us to never remain complacent. We have to move forward, and having that forward thinking approach will help to promote that type of an appearance to an employer, and also make sure that we keep that top of mind, that it is not our job just to be somewhere and remain stagnant, unless that's our goal for our career, to find something where we can plateau and be comfortable. That's okay too. But if our goal is to advance within a career, then we need to recognize what that looks like. And that means staying up to date on current information, current skills, and then learning appropriately and surrounding ourselves with people who are like-minded, who have like goals. Some people may feel is a negative because of the competitive component, but actually that oftentimes pushes us towards success. And so if you can surround yourself with people who are like-minded, that can be very, very helpful. I find in my practice that some people shy away from that. They shy away from talking to a peer because they fear by doing so that they'll give something away, that when there's a new role, a new opportunity, that person will get it. And so if possible, if you're able to separate yourself from that, and instead say, this can help me because I'm going to then feed off of him or her and she off of me. Doing so can be very, very effective. It can help you to have that healthy competition, which can really keep the spark alive and help to move you forward in your career.
And, that reminds me of this concept of a reciprocal exchange, it is a, social exchange theory we talk about in the workplace. And, when people in a workplace can have those types of exchanges where it's reciprocal, one person helping the other back and forth, it leads to much more beneficial outcomes for both parties. Now, Karen, I see you came online, so are there some questions?
Yes, so this goes back to trying to find the career path for oneself. So the question here is, if the individual or somebody is undecided about their career path, how much do negative metacognitive cognitions play a role? So a bit more into psychology here.
So the question was, made up?
Negative metacognitions, how much do they play a role in being undecided about one's career path?
Well, you know what? I don't know. That's not, frankly, that's not something that I've ever studied or can directly speak to. I guess is this question getting at the idea of like maybe someone holding a general mindset of I don't know, is it indecisiveness or I can't I guess it's the process by which they're trying to make that decision. And that's if we're thinking about metacognition. So I suppose that certainly can play a role. And you know what? Speaking of that, though, I'm going to throw out, this one is not free, which ONET is, but I'm going to throw out another resource. If someone's really struggling with something like that, and maybe they find they're getting too many options from ONET, or, they're having a paralysis by analysis, you got to pay for it, but I'm going to recommend the Strong Interest Inventory. That is a fantastic tool for helping to match people with careers. What's great about it is they use this really unique psychometric approach where you have no idea what they're trying to measure. They just ask you what seem like a bunch of random questions, but it ends up matching you to a job very effectively. I'll tell you this, when I took it in undergrad, it matched me to psychology. And I guess maybe it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it seemed to be right on that count. So that's one thing that I might recommend in such a scenario.
Thank you, Mike. And then we're going to put those resources again on our website after the presentation. Look for it in a couple of days on FAU Division of Research Research in Action website. Amy, there's one more question that goes back to employers being rude, and this individual attendee is particularly disturbed that during interviews, for example, employers can be very rude if you're not fulfilling some of the requirements, I guess, for example, if you don't have a graduate degree or you're a PhD, yet they're interviewing you, and they some of the interviewers can be very rude if you're saying, well, I don't have that PhD or terminal degree that is required. The question is, why is it? Why would these interviewers even the employers even interview you, if they're actually expecting a PhD, and then being very rude to the individual who's seeking a job?
Well, I mean, each situation is different. So it's hard to speak to why somebody would pull someone in for an interview if they don't feel that they're qualified. But a couple of things come to mind. It could be that you are being called in because you are the highest level or the closest match to the requirements or the expectations that are there set for the job. It could be that they're just trying to practice on you. But I would say if you walk into an interview and you are uncomfortable with the employer or the hiring manager, then that's not the right place for you. And you can also look at the people who are in the office space, not the people necessarily interviewing you, but the people in the office environment to get a feel for what it would be like to work in that organization. So if you feel that way, then that's not the right fit. I appreciate that sometimes we have to take a job because we need a job. And if that's the case and you want to overcome the hurdle of dealing with someone who is rude during the interview, then you might then speak specifically to your experiences, speak to why you feel they might be they may have hired you. So, for instance, thank you so much for bringing me here. Yes, you're correct. I don't have this degree. Yes, you're correct. I don't have this credential. However, I believe the reason I was called in is because, and then go through all of the reasons why you truly are qualified. What I don't have in education, I can make up for in experiences. Perhaps, so you have to sell yourself and you can turn it so that to move away from that negativity. But I, again, would argue if you have a couple of job options on the table and you're in an environment that doesn't feel friendly or comfortable, then that might not be a place you'd be sticking around for long.
Just from personal experience, I would definitely second that. That may not be an environment. If it disturbs you already during an interview, that may not be an environment you actually would want to work in. But sometimes I also, again, from personal experience, it seems like some of the employers want to shock, and see how you react, right? Shock you as an interviewee and see how you react. Can you deal with stress? If it's a job that you're applying for that's particularly stressful, for example, there are some of these more psychological tests almost that employers sometimes use to see how do you react in certain stress situations. Not necessarily, from my perspective, the best thing to do, but I've seen it happening. Thank you very much. Those are all the questions we have right now.
It's not the best from my perspective either. And, I would certainly, if I was consulting with this organization, I would tell them to do things differently. But, there's going to be so much variance between employers, right, concerning how these things are carried out. And, I have met with people who, when they interview, they do like to do things like that. Again, I would never recommend it. And I have a lot of data to suggest that it's a bad idea and a lot of research that supports that that should not be done. But the reality is that not every hiring manager is concerned with doing things by the book. A lot of times things run much more on gut instincts than industrial psychologists like myself and Amy would prefer. So I definitely agree the self-selection aspect does have to be at play. And if you do choose that this is something you want to pursue regardless, I thought that Amy's advice was excellent. Do you have any more thoughts on like the kind of the human capital building, or do you want to talk about maybe more of the job search component?
Sure. I mean, we can go either route or even sort of blend them into each other. I mean, I think that we've spoken, about the strong inventory. We've spoken about ONET of key ways to determine where we might best fit. But then the question is, well, okay, great. I know what I want to do, but then how do I get my job? I do think that that's important, and people do struggle with that, especially if they haven't done so yet. So first thing is networking and speaking to people who are in the field, people who could say to you, oh, you know what, I don't have anything personally, however. But by the way, I'd like to place a word of caution when talking about this. Hoarding someone's inbox, bombarding them with emails or phone calls is not a way to win friends and influence people, right? We need to set boundaries for ourselves. And so setting a schedule, I think, is incredibly important here. So let's say that we are in this job search mode. We need to say, okay, so I'm going to spend 1 hour every Monday and Wednesday and Friday searching the job boards, or I'm going to use some electronic notification system, which a lot of them have, to say, here are the types of jobs I'm interested in, ping my inbox when you see it, or text me when you see it. And so we can set those great features up so that we don't spend our time doing that. Making sure we have a solid resume that is refined and specific to the industry. Perhaps a cover page or some type of a blurb that we can say if we're emailing a resume or putting it into a job board is also really important, so that people want to look and see, who we are and why they want to delve deeper. But all of those things, so we want to have a schedule. And I think if you are fatigued and experience burnout through this process, that's not effective either. So it's important to schedule in time for fun, schedule in time to relax, but make sure that you dedicate either a set goal. So I will apply to 5 jobs today, or I will spend 1 hour searching the internet, or I will, spend 30 minutes networking. Whatever that is, make it and commit to it and hold yourself accountable to meeting those goals. And then ultimately you will have, at the end of the week, even if you don't have a job, even if you don't have an interview lined up, you can say, I feel successful because I've reached out to 15 people, I've made 20 new contacts, and I've sent my resume 3 times. That eventually will add up to what you need it to be. I was in sales before starting grad school. And in order to, it was the kind of thing where you have this telephonic type thing, you go and have meetings, and we were trained, okay, so if you call 10 people, you'll have 2 appointments. If you have 2 appointments, so you have to set it up and recognize that ultimately it is going to get you where you need to be, and you need to be patient with yourself.
So Amy, you took a lot of the words right out of my mouth. That was really covered a lot of it from A to Z. I thought you did a really good job describing to people what is one of the best predictors of job search success, and it is job search intensity. Setting goals, keeping to some type of schedule, and ensuring that what I tell my students is, not don't treat it like a 40-hour-a-week job, but treat your job search like a job. It needs to be something that you actually dedicate yourself to and that you expend effort on. And the research is incredibly clear. The more intensity people have with their job search, and I don't mean like, oh, I'm intense about it, but I mean, keeping at it. Having a schedule, searching, I like how you gave the example of particular days of the week at particular times. Put it in your calendar. This is my time to, reach out to people in the field on LinkedIn. This is my time to search job boards. Whatever the particular route is that you may be going, take it, quite seriously in that respect, because if you're expecting a good outcome and you're not putting in the effort, there's a discrepancy there. Amy, you also mentioned burning out, which is something that I like to talk about too, because the job search process is a grind. It can be very, very difficult. And it's very easy to get fried. I mean, come on, how many people in the audience, and I know I've experienced this, where you've applied to a job and it's just a black hole, right? It's just black hole. You apply, it goes somewhere, you don't know, you never hear about it again. It can kind of be a frustrating process. So trying to do things to unplug, psychological detachment is the term that we use, right? To try to just detach ourselves from this potentially stressful event is very important, because the research is also clear on this. When people get stressed about their job search, they stop doing it. That's not going to lead to a successful outcome. So we see a cycle where if people aren't detaching and recovering properly, that then they start to get burnt out, then they stop searching, and then they don't have success. Whereas the people who are methodical and ensure that they are keeping it segmented have more success overall, both to having clear defined goals, which we know works for virtually everything, and for resisting the burnout. There are two concepts that didn't come up yet, though, that I want to touch upon, because this has been really important in the literature. The first one is self-efficacy. We see a big difference between people based on their belief concerning what the outcome is going to be. I talked about, and Amy talked about, how important this intensity of your job search is. Well, if you don't believe that your job search is going to be successful, you're not going to search with any intensity at all, right? Like, oh, I don't care. I can't do it. So I know you got a psychologist here telling you to believe in yourself, but I'm telling you, the research is there. Job search self-efficacy, the belief that it's actually two things: that you can search for a job, right? Like, I'm very confident in my ability to use LinkedIn to reach out to my contacts. If you're not, practice. I'm confident in my ability to use the different job boards, and if not, figure it out. But then there's also the other piece, which is I'm confident that this will work out one day. When people give up hope we track people over time in this research. And when people start to think, two people who start searching at the same time, they're not having any success. The person who stops believing, stops trying, doesn't get the favorable outcome. So ensuring that you are maintaining this favorable evaluation is very critical. And the other thing I wanted to note has to do with job search strategies, because we talked about, scheduling it and searching for a job with intensity, and putting a lot of effort into it and having goals, which is critically important. But the question is, when you are searching for the job, what is it you're actually doing? We look at two categories here. You can search for a job in a way that is very sporadic, or that is very focused. In other words, I may say, you know what, I just need a job. So I'm just going to go on these job boards, and anything that sounds like I'm remotely qualified, I'm going to apply. I had a friend who did this after grad school. He told me that he applied for over 1,000 jobs, but you know what? He didn't get any of them. Whereas my colleagues who applied for 4 or 5 jobs that were a really good fit, and they made sure their cover letter and their resume communicated their value. And, they tried to figure out if they know anyone who works at that organization. They really were focused in trying to hit jobs that were a good fit for them, and they had a really good chance in getting, and they had the much better outcome. So more is not always better. In fact, less is often more. So it allows us to really focus on those things.
I wanted to interrupt you a bit, Mike, there, because that's an interesting piece of advice, because many of the job ads that are out there, you'll never ever meet all of the requirements, right? I mean, that they are often so specific that if you are only going with those that you truly qualify for, you may not ever find a job ad, right? So you have to, from my experience, you have to kind of balance that, right? You have to determine what you said, we both said earlier, determine what is actually what you want to get out of the job. What is the type of job that you want to get, and does this job ad sound like that would be the one that you're actually looking for, regardless of whether you don't speak, I don't know, Spanish or something, right? Or whatever the requirement might be, right? And then, yes, as Amy was saying, yes, I don't have that requirement, but here are all the other things that qualify me for the job. We do have a couple of questions from our audience here again. So particularly older people may struggle with finding a job, right? Let's say those who are like 50, 55, or maybe 60 and older, but still looking for a job. Do you have any advice on how to go about and be still competitive in the market, if you like, if you're in the older age group?
I have some initial thoughts to share, and then I'll kick it off to Amy. Something to consider is this is something that we see in the research, that the older someone gets, the, in general, less successful job searches become. I know that could sound very bleak when putting it like that, but you needn't think of it that way because the question is always why. And we do have a situation where there's likely some age discrimination. Older individuals, especially in an environment that leverages a lot of technology, deal with a lot of stereotypes. And I hear, concerns about these stereotypes all the time, and they are legitimate. There's another perspective to offer here, though, and it's being in okay, so I talked earlier about how we can think about age in different ways. You have calendar age, but you also have these other elements that matter. Something that we do see is that the older someone is, it's also more likely that they've been working in a single job with a single employer for a very long span of time. And what could happen in that instance is the human capital is not sufficiently kept up to date. So that is something that we do see in the research literature. So although one of the reasons why older individuals have a harder time is due to stereotypes and discrimination based on the job market, which unfortunately is harder to address if you're just submitting an application, right? There's not much opportunity there. But to the extent that one could take a realistic appraisal of where their human capital is, and if it has perhaps gotten stale over time, and if there are things that could be done to help to bring it up to speed, that could help to solve some of those issues. Another thing is I brought up the concept of embeddedness, meaning that, generally when people are younger, they're the ones who are going to be more likely to move across the country for a new job. So, it's far easier to find opportunities. The geographical constraints also play a role. And if that's something you can work around, you can consider it, but it's simply not going to be possible for everyone.
Excellent points, Michael. Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, sure. No, those are great points. I think that it's important also to recognize the power that we can bring to a job by having that age, by having that experience. And so I think that we need to be able to share that. So even if it's phrasing it in your cover letter or highlighting it in your resume, to indicate, in my experience I've seen, I have 30 years of experience in this. It's super important. And so sometimes people may not call someone into an interview because they think they are overqualified and that the tenure of the experience makes it so that they wouldn't be someone who would stick around in a job. Let's say it's a lower level job. So if you're trying to change careers and not stay within your industry and you have all of that experience, then that might be something to emphasize in your cover letter or when you have a call with the recruiter, to say, I recognize that this is a shift and I am ready, willing, and able to come to the table. And while I am more experienced and that the employer may see that as a negative, in fact, that is speaking to my consistency, speaking to my drive, and therefore, I'd like to have the opportunity to show them why it's beneficial to have me in the organization.
And maybe with our last few moments, we can kind of transition then to talking about the hiring procedures more broadly, because Amy, what I heard in your response, hitting at this idea of impression management or self-presentation tactics. And that is at play in there's really two big opportunities for that. You have the resume and cover letter, where you could try to self-promote. which is what was being described there. And then there's also the job interview. And those are the two big opportunities. So now we're talking about how do we, as job seekers, interact with the organization's hiring procedures. And I'll note at the top that there's obviously every employer is always going to be looking for different things at different points in time. We're talking about between person differences. But there is a general, there's been research that scraped job ads and they looked at survey data and they're like, in general, what is it that employers look for? And it can be distilled down into three things. The acronym is RAW, RAW, the RAW model. Employers like it when people are rewarding to deal with. Hey, I'm gonna have to work with you, right? So if I'm interviewing with you, I better like our interactions together. Have the ability to do the job, because if you can't do the job, you don't have the human capital, you don't have the skills, you're of no use to me in this position. And W being work ethic. So, can you get the job done? Do you put forth the effort? And we saw how you kind of suggested hitting at some of those pieces in the resume through kind of using some self-presentation tactics to show what you're trying to. And the same thing can come up in the interview and at other opportunities throughout the hiring process.
So we're almost out of time. I know we have a number of more questions here. I will ask our presenters to answer most of them offline later, and we're going to post the answers, and the questions on our website. And we will also post some of the resources that Dr. Harari and Dr. Cooper Hakim have mentioned during their presentation there, so you can, follow those websites that they mentioned specifically. I'm going to finish us off with one last question here. We talked a little bit about the atmosphere, during an interview, but it also spills over to the atmosphere in the workplace. And that's a tricky question to ask. We were talking about interviews now. So in an interview, how do you best ask about what is the atmosphere in which you would be working? And it even goes to the point, what are the expectations in terms of when do I have to show up in the morning? How long do I have to stay at night? Those are questions you don't necessarily want to ask during an interview, because you don't want to look like, oh, this person doesn't really want to work, right? Do you have any recommendations for this?
Just something related. I'll let Amy do it because this is a communication thing, but one thing that comes to mind is that impression management in an interview works both ways. Employers are also trying to attract you, and they're trying to find people who are a good fit for the position. So asking for clarification, in my mind, is generally not looked at as a con, but we're just about out of time, so I'll kick it over to Amy.
That's what I was going to say also, Mike. I think that, it's important to ask those questions. It shows that we're interested in the job and interested in the organization. So even saying, can you tell me a little bit about what a day in the life of, a blank employee looks like? Or when do people generally come into the office? Do people generally eat lunch together? Those types of questions show interest in the job and in the organization.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike, Amy. Appreciate your time today. Again, we will be posting the questions and any additional answers to your questions on our website, Division of Research at FAU, Research in Action. Please look out for that. It will come in a couple of days. Again, thank you very much. Thanks for attending. Glad to have you. Have a great day.